Hello and welcome. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. On the show are the top stories from India and the region. I'm Gautam Roy. And for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in Washington, D.C., Nick Harper. Hi, Nick. How's it looking in Washington, D.C. today? You are looking quite bipartisan.
Morning, Gautam. It's certainly shaping up to be a busy day here in Washington, D.C. It is a 10 a.m. in the morning here. It's 3 in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the programme, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris and could face a tougher reception than usual. We'll have all the details. But first, the headlines.
Benjamin Netanyahu said to meet Joe Biden, followed by Kamala Harris at Washington, D.C. on Friday, a day after the U.S. president said he'll make ending the Gaza war his top priority. Typhoon Gaby makes landfall in China's Fujian province after leaving a trail of destruction in Taiwan. Authorities relocate over 150,000 people from coastal areas. And the Kremlin says Russia is open to talks with Ukraine but needs to understand Kyiv's readiness for dialogue as fighting continues. First up, Typhoon Gaby made landfall in China's Fujian province on Thursday after sweeping through northern Taiwan. Mass evacuations have been carried out in China ahead of the typhoon. Typhoon Gaby had made landfall on Wednesday in the northeastern coast of Taiwan, killing 3 people and injuring 380 others. Around 500,000 households in Taiwan suffered power cuts on Thursday. A freighter sank off the Taiwanese coast and 5 more ships were stranded. There are several sailors who are missing. Operations at Taiwan's main international airport slowly returned to normal on Thursday. China and Russia organized joint air strategic patrols with nuclear-capable bombers near the U.S. state of Alaska in the North Pacific and Arctic on Thursday. The patrol, which is part of an annual military engagement plan, has prompted the U.S. and Canada to scramble fighter jets. U.S. military's North American Aerospace Defense Command said that the activity intercepted in the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone is not seen as a threat and it will continue to monitor competitor activity near North America. China's Defense Ministry said it deepened strategic mutual trust and coordination between the Chinese and Russian militaries, and it did not target any third parties and had nothing to do with the current international situation. A marine tanker carrying industrial fuel sank in rough seas off the Philippines on Thursday, causing the death of a crew member and an oil spill that could spread to waters of the capital Manila. 16 of the 17 crew members of MT Terra Nova have been rescued after the ship capsized off the coastal town of Lime in Bataan province. The Coast Guard said they found the body of a previously missing crew member in the sea of Lime town in Bataan province on Thursday. The Coast Guard said it is now addressing the oil spill and intends to finish siphoning off the fuel from the sunken tanker to prevent further spreading within 7 days. 3 44-meter multi-role response vessels have been deployed as part of the exercise. UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy visited India on Wednesday. Speaking on the subject, India's Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson said that the meeting took place a month of his swearing in. He said that both sides recognize positive movement on FTA negotiations and hope for mutually beneficial outcomes.
We had the visit yesterday, the official visit of UK Foreign Secretary. This has happened within 1 month of the swearing of the new government in UK, and it speaks of the kind of commitment that is there on both sides and on the UK side as well on strengthening this partnership. UK Foreign Secretary met with the Prime Minister, called on the Prime Minister. He also had a meeting with the National Security Advisor and then bilateral discussions with the External Affairs Minister. Both sides recognize that positive movement have happened on the FTA negotiations, and hopefully both sides will take this forward.
India's Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar is in Vientiane to take part in the foreign ministers' meetings under the ASEAN framework in the format of the ASEAN-India, East Asia Summit and ASEAN Regional Forum. Dr. Jaishankar reached Laos on Thursday to participate in the ASEAN meeting. He expressed anticipation for strengthening ties with the bloc as India celebrates a decade of its Act East policy. The meeting of the foreign ministers from the ASEAN will be followed by two meetings in Vientiane, Lao PDR, between the 25th to the 27th of this month. They are set to address key global issues that will be attended by officials from the US, European Union, Japan, China, Russia and more. And the External Affairs Minister is also holding meetings with his counterparts from other countries in Laos. He met his counterpart from the Philippines, Enrique A. Manalo. Both the leaders discussed strengthening the relationship and partnership in Indo-Pacific with a view to uphold rule of law and ASEAN centrality in the region. And the External Affairs Minister also met Timor-Leste's Foreign Minister Bendito Freitas. While they focused on their discussion on their views and priorities in the Indo-Pacific region, they also exchanged views on issues of mutual and regional cooperation. Now, getting a hostage deal done in the Gaza conflict to possibly move towards peace is in focus today in the US Capitol after an "Our enemy is your enemy" speech to a joint session of the American Congress. Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu is set to meet President Joe Biden in the Oval Office on Friday, followed by another meeting with Vice President and presumptive Democratic Party presidential candidate Kamala Harris. Nick Harper is in Washington, D.C. and gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Now, Nick, Biden's been unsuccessful so far in getting the peace deal together, but what makes him think, once he's given up on the second term, that he'll be able to convince the likes of Netanyahu, who's been hell-bent on completely obliterating the Hamas so far?
Well, undoubtedly, it's a tricky day ahead for diplomacy for both sides, for the Israelis, but also for the US. The US President Joe Biden will be hosting the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House on Thursday. They're going to be discussing progress towards a ceasefire deal in Gaza and the release of hostages. Vice President Kamala Harris is also scheduled to hold a separate meeting with the Israeli PM. These high-level talks are part of ongoing diplomatic efforts to end the Gaza conflict. Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump will also host Netanyahu on Friday. That's going to be taking place at his resort in Palm Beach, Florida, a sign that the two men are looking to improve ties. Their meeting will be their first since the end of Trump's presidency, during which the two forged a strong relationship. And it comes at a time of strained relations between Netanyahu and the Democratic President Joe Biden over Israel's conflict against Hamas in Gaza. Well, to get us more on all of this, we're joined by DD India's Mitch McCann, live in New York City. Mitch, so what can we expect from today's meetings?
Well, as you said, Nick, it is going to be a tricky day for diplomacy as Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington meeting with the President, Joe Biden, and then the Vice President and presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu will meet Joe Biden for a bilateral meeting in a few hours' time, and then they will both meet with families of hostages that were taken in that attack on Israel October 7th last year. Now, this is going to be an interesting meeting between Biden and Netanyahu because their relationship, which dates back decades, has become fractious for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is that Joe Biden suggested that the Israeli actions in Gaza were over the top in recent months, and he threatened to withhold some new arms transfers and repeatedly pressured Netanyahu to hold back on their bombardment in Gaza. So they'll meet today and they'll try and discuss, as well as what you said about trying to bring an end to this war and getting those hostages back. Then Netanyahu will meet with the Vice President, Kamala Harris, and this will be interesting given the fact she is the presumptive nominee for the party now, and she could be the president in a few months' time. So Netanyahu will want to shore up support from Kamala Harris, but her personal opinions on this war are lesser known as in terms of what the administration is doing. But we're likely to hear more from Kamala Harris around her positions on this war. We've heard from her husband, Douglas Emhoff, in recent days. He was on a Zoom call with the Jewish Women for Kamala Harris group where he said this: "Let me make this clear. The Vice President has been and will be a strong supporter of Israel as a secure democratic and Jewish state." So we are likely to hear from Kamala Harris on this issue as well. And finally, as you mentioned, Benjamin Netanyahu will then travel to Florida, to the Mar-a-Lago resort owned by Donald Trump, where they will meet as well. Now, they've had a positive relationship for many years, but there has been some fractures in their relationship as well. Of course, when Joe Biden was sworn in as the president, Benjamin Netanyahu congratulated Joe Biden, and he was criticised by Donald Trump for doing that. Donald Trump has also put a lot of pressure on Netanyahu to release those hostages. But Netanyahu really having to shore up support from both sides of the aisle as we head into a very close US election in the coming months.
And Mitch, on Wednesday we saw the Israeli Prime Minister speaking to Congress in a joint address. What type of reaction has there been to that speech?
Well, there's been a mixed reaction, Nick. The Republicans, Lindsey Graham, the Republican from South Carolina, said it was an epic speech as he praised it, but Democrats haven't been so kind. Nancy Pelosi posted on social media after the speech, the address. She said it was the worst presentation of any foreign dignitary invited and honoured with the privilege of addressing the Congress of the United States. And other Democrats had similar things to say. Now, Netanyahu spoke for over an hour, and outside the event, thousands of people gathered in Washington protesting his visit. Now, we saw images of flags burning, graffiti on monuments, even a burning effigy in the street of Benjamin Netanyahu as he spoke. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister said of his critics yesterday, many choose to stand with evil. Many who choose to stand with evil, they stand with Hamas, they stand with rapists and murderers. So really a divided Congress between Democrats and Republicans at the moment over that speech. But as I say, Nancy Pelosi, a senior Democrat, former Speaker of the House, very critical of Benjamin Netanyahu's address yesterday.
Mitch McCann live for us in New York. Thank you, Mitch. And to recap on that speech on Wednesday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave a fiery address to the joint houses of Congress, in which he vowed total victory against Hamas and condemned American opponents of the war in Gaza. He was speaking to a joint session of the US Congress ahead of talks with the US President Joe Biden. Speaking for nearly an hour, Netanyahu said the US had a shared interest in his country's fight against Hamas and other Iran-backed armed groups.
Our world is in upheaval. In the Middle East, Iran's axis of terror confronts America, Israel, and our Arab friends. This is not a clash of civilizations. It's a clash between barbarism and civilization. For the forces of civilization to triumph, America and Israel must stand together.
US President Joe Biden explained his abrupt departure from the 2024 presidential race in an 11-minute televised national address from the White House Oval Office on Wednesday. Biden's address comes after weeks of pressure from fellow Democrats for him to step aside since his June 27th debate against Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. Biden said that he will focus on his job as president over the remaining 6 months in office, and he also expressed his unwavering support for Vice President Kamala Harris.
I revere this office, but I love my country more. It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. But in the defense of democracy, which is at stake, I think it's more important than any title. I draw strength and I find joy in working for the American people. But this sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we the people. We can never forget that. And I never have.
The US Senate is set to vote on Thursday on 2 online safety bills that could force social media companies to take responsibility for how their platforms affect children and teenagers, a step parents and advocates have been demanding for years. The bills have broad bipartisan support and are expected to pass the necessary 60-vote threshold for passage in the Senate, where Democrats hold a 51 to 49 majority. The Kids Online Safety Act would require social media platforms to enable options for minors to protect their information and disable addictive product features by default. It would also create a legal duty for the companies to prevent and mitigate dangers to minors, including suicide and eating disorders content. Well, Israeli forces have advanced deeper into some towns in the eastern side of Khan Yunis in southern Gaza on Thursday, just hours after the Israeli Prime Minister spoke to US lawmakers about how he was actively engaged in bringing hostages home. Fighting in recent days has centered around the eastern towns of Bani Suali, Al-Zani and Al-Qarara, where the army said it had found the bodies of 5 Israelis who were taken hostage by Hamas during its October 7th attack on Israel. According to Israeli tallies, Hamas militants took more than 250 hostages in the early morning raid into southern Israel and killed 1,200 people. Israeli operations intensified in several areas of Rafah, near the border with Egypt, as tanks operated northwest and in the town centre itself. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov on Thursday said that Russia is open to negotiations with Ukraine on ending the conflict, but needs clarification on Kiev's willingness to engage in such talks.
Russia, in general, is open to the negotiation process. But first, you need to understand how ready the Ukrainian side is for this, and if the Ukrainian side has permission for this from its curators. Because so far, you see, very different statements are being made.
DD India's Dasha Chernyshova sent us this report from Moscow.
Western powers are ready to give their permission for Ukraine to start those talks. The big question for Moscow at this point is with whom to talk, because Moscow insists that's the president of Ukraine. But at the same time, we're also hearing that Moscow will find people in Ukraine. The new development this time round is obviously the timing when this is happening, and it is happening following Orban's trip to Ukraine, then to Russia, and then to China. And now the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba is in China, saying that in principle Ukraine is ready to start those negotiations. So certainly Moscow is indicating once again its readiness, but again it wants to make sure that its concerns, which Moscow calls legitimate, will be taken into account, and that is taking into account the situation on the battlefield. And an interesting thing to add here is that Dmitry Peskov, Kremlin spokesman, said that why Ukraine is making those statements this time round, that it is ready for talks. Perhaps, he said, that is because of the developments on the battlefield.
Pixar movie Inside Out has now become the highest grossing animated film of all time. Inside Out 2 is a sequel to the 2015 hit about the inner workings of a young girl's mind. It's now grossed almost $1.5 billion at the global box office so far. The movie, which hit cinemas in June, has surpassed Disney's 2019 blockbuster Frozen 2, which had grossed $1.45 billion worldwide. Inside Out 2 also now sits at number 13 in global box office rankings.
Hello, I'm Anxiety. Where can I put my stuff?
A new emotion.
Oh, I'm sorry. We wanted to make such a good first impression.
What do you mean we?
I'm Envy.
Great movie. Well, that's it from me here in Washington. Gotten back to you in the studio.
Thanks a lot, Nick, for being with us from Washington, D.C. And still to come on DD India Global, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer informed citizens that the police officer caught on camera in a viral video carrying out violent arrest at the Manchester airport has been suspended. An anti-government protest still rocked Nairobi even a day after President Ruto addressed the nation, making announcements to appease the agitators.
We simply throw things away when we're done using them, be it a cup, an old shirt, or a used battery. But we can do a lot better. Let's find out how.
I thought I can get a bunch of people together and we can just create this beautiful product while not being wasteful, while paying people correctly, while not throwing things into the garbage can.
Our goal is to recover 95% of our nickel, which is the most expensive, most valuable ore, including aluminum and copper, of course.
We are successfully managing waste in this small town with a limited number of people, resources, and market. If we can do that here, it would definitely be possible in larger towns that have many advantages over us.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I'm Gautam Roy. Now, United Kingdom's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said on Thursday that an officer has been suspended after a video of a violent arrest at the Manchester airport went viral. The video shows a British police officer kick and stamp on a man's head during the arrest. A protest was held outside a police station in Rochdale, Greater Manchester, late on Wednesday night, which seems to have triggered the suspension.
In just a moment. Well, I have seen the footage, and for that reason, I do understand the public concern. Obviously, action has now been taken in relation to the suspension of an officer, and the Home Secretary is already having those discussions with the Mayor of Manchester. I think they've already happened, or they're taking place as we speak, and she has made sure that she's kept updated on developments ever since the incident. And so obviously there's a process now that will go into place, but I completely understand the public concern, having seen the footage myself.
Anti-government protests kept flaring up in Kenya as police fired weapons, launched tear gas into streets and arrested protesters in Nairobi on Thursday. Just the previous day, President William Ruto addressed the nation proposing amendments to anti-corruption and public procurement laws. He also announced new ministers, some from the opposition to his cabinet. But activists have criticized the new government as a corrupt bargain. More than 50 people have been killed in the 6 weeks of demonstrations which have continued even after Ruto's tax hikes were shelved. Now, adding to the delight of tourists and locals, Italy's vintage train, also called the Italian Trans-Siberian Rail Line, passes through the picturesque locations including the forests of the Maiella National Park and the Abruzzo Highlands, brushing up antique hamlets and hidden hermitages. Also known as the Park Railway, it runs through one of the most panoramic rail itineraries of the country, all the while bringing good revenue to the tourism industry. Let's also quickly bring you some other stories from around the world as well. Now, the National Election Commission has said a Gazette notification will be issued on Friday, which would include the date of the presidential election in Sri Lanka. Earlier this year, the Election Commission issued a statement that elections will be held between the 17th of September to the 16th of October. Ahead of the Olympics opening ceremony, U.S. First Lady Jill Biden arrived in Paris. She will lead a team U.S. delegation in the opening ceremony scheduled for Friday. Wildfires that started in Canada's Jasper earlier this week continue to burn. The dry weather coupled with prolonged heat wave is the main cause of the spread. Around 25,000 people were evacuated from Jasper and neighboring areas as a precautionary measure. Now, the Cape Town Opera, for its 25th anniversary, is producing a graphic rendition of Donizetti's Lucia di Lammermoor that was staged in 1999. This year, the cast is an all South African. With financial downturn due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many companies have had to draw their curtains. This company claims to be the only continuously active opera company on the continent at the moment. Take a look, and thanks for watching this show. And that's all we have in this edition of DD India Global, but do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. For those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on the DD India mobile app. The app is available on both Android and iOS platforms. You can scan the QR code and download the app right now. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Gautam Roy, and for all of us here in Delhi, thanks for watching DD India Global.